Hey, my name's Alyssa Ray Whitmore. I'm 35, and what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see family loyalty forever. But before we dive into this crazy story, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments below, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe to the channel because we're building something special here together. So, imagine this. I'm standing in a funeral home, surrounded by my family, who hasn't spoken to me in over a decade. The room smells like lilies and polished wood, and there's this heavy quiet, like everyone's holding their breath. My sister's husband, this military officer with his chest full of medals, is near my mom's casket, chatting up the crowd, all charm and confidence. My dad's over by the wall, clutching his whiskey, throwing me that same judgmental look he's had since I was a kid. My sister's there too, adjusting her dress, giving me that quick glance that says I'm still the family disappointment. Then her husband looks up. His eyes hit mine, and his face just drains of color, like he's seen something impossible. Right there, in front of everyone, my dad, my sister, dozens of military folks in their crisp uniforms, he snaps to attention, salutes, and shouts, "General Whitmore, ma'am." Every officer in the room follows. They all snap up, hands to foreheads, eyes locked on me. The silence is so loud it's like the air's gone solid. My sister's staring at me, her mouth open, like she's looking at a ghost. My dad's grip on his glass slips, and I swear it almost hits the floor. Because me, the one they called a failure, the one they said would never amount to anything, I just outranked every single person in that room. That moment felt like the world shifted. For 17 years, I'd been the family embarrassment. The one they mocked at every holiday, the one they dismissed without a second thought. But right then, standing there with all those salutes aimed at me, all that judgment, all that doubt, it shattered. It was one perfect moment where they had to see me for who I'd become. But that wasn't a revenge. That was just the spark that started it all. Now listen, if you're someone who believes respect is earned through dedication and service, not handed out based on family connections and appearances, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because only people who truly understand that real achievement comes from perseverance and character will subscribe. Those who think success is about fitting into someone else's expectations, well, they probably won't subscribe. To get how I went from the family outcast to brigadier general without them ever knowing, we got to go back to where it all began. Growing up in our little Midwestern town, the Whitmore name meant something. It wasn't just a last name, it was a brand. My family was obsessed with how things looked, how people saw us. We lived in this big colonial house with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn, the kind of place that screamed success before you even stepped inside. Dad was the king of it all, this stern real estate mogul who'd built an empire buying and selling half the county. He walked around like every room was his boardroom, his voice sharp, his expectations sharper. Mom was his perfect counterpart, a socialite wellness coach who floated through country club brunches and yoga retreats, always smiling, always polished. To them, life was about status, about keeping the Whitmore name shiny and untarnished. My older brother, James, fit right into their world. He was the golden boy, headed for finance, already talking about Ivy League schools and Dad's firm by the time he was 16. My sister, Camille, was just as bad. She was 4 years older than me, whip smart, and headed to law school with this effortless charm that made everyone love her. She'd come home from college with stories about her perfect grades, her perfect friends, and eventually her perfect fiancé, Ryan Prescott, this rising Air Force officer who looked like he stepped out of a recruiting poster. They were the Whitmore ideal, successful, poised, everything Mom and Dad bragged about at their dinner parties. And then there was me, Alyssa, the odd one out. Even as a kid, I didn't care about the things they did. I'd rather climb trees in the backyard than sit through Mom's etiquette lessons. I'd sneak out to the library to read books about history or strategy instead of gossiping at Camille's sleepovers. I wasn't trying to be different. It just came naturally. But in our house, different was the same as wrong. I'd catch Dad's frown when I'd ask too many questions at the dinner table, or Mom's sigh when I showed up to her garden party in sneakers instead of heels. They didn't say it out loud, not yet, but I could feel it. I wasn't what a Whitmore was supposed to be. By the time I was a teenager, things got worse. I was good at school, not Camille level perfect, but I held my own. I ran track, joined debate club, even organized a food drive for the local shelter. I thought maybe that'd be enough to make them see me. But it wasn't. James was off at college by then, already interning at Dad's firm. Camille was engaged to Ryan, planning her big law career. And me? I was just there. The afterthought. Dad would lecture me about potential, how I needed to pick a real path, something respectable like business or law. Mom would pull me aside, her voice all soft and disappointed, saying things like, "Alyssa, you could be so much more if you just tried to fit in." I didn't want to fit in. I wanted to matter. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I was doing wrong. Why couldn't they see I was trying to find my own way? I started noticing little things. How Dad's eyes lit up when he talked about James's latest deal, how Mom gushed over Camille's wedding plans. But when I tell them about my debate win or the shelter thanking me, they just nod and change the subject. It was like I was invisible unless I was screwing up. Things came to a head when I was 17. I'd been thinking about my future a lot, about what I wanted instead of what they wanted. One day, I was at the mall with some friends and we passed an army recruiting booth. The guy there, this sergeant with a buzz cut and a warm smile, started talking to us about service, about leadership, about making a difference. It hit me like a lightning bolt. This was it. This was what I'd been looking for, something real, something bigger than our little town's obsession with appearances. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept picturing myself in uniform, doing something that mattered, not just chasing status. A week later, I told my family I was enlisting. We were at dinner, the table set with Mom's fancy china, the air thick with the smell of roasted lamb. James was home for the weekend, Camille and Ryan were there, all of us crammed around this table that felt more like a stage. I waited for a lull in their talk about Camille's law school applications, then just said it. "I'm joining the army." The room went dead quiet. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Mom's wine glass froze in her hand. Camille's eyes flicked to Ryan, like she was waiting for him to laugh. James just stared at me, confused. Then Dad put his fork down, slow and deliberate, and said, "You're what?" I tried to explain about wanting to serve, about finding purpose. But he cut me off. "Alyssa, this is the most foolish thing you've ever said. You're wasting your potential. You think the army's some kind of game? You're throwing away everything we've given you." His voice was like ice, and I could feel my face burning. Mom jumped in, her words tumbling out. "What will I tell people at the club? My daughter, a soldier? Alyssa, you can't do this to us." Camille, though, she was the worst. She leaned back in her chair, this smug little smile on her face, and said, "Good luck with that. Maybe you'll learn how to mop floors." Ryan chuckled, like it was a joke, but I saw the way he looked at me, like I was some kid playing dress up. James didn't say anything, just kept eating, like the whole thing wasn't worth his time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them they were wrong, that I wasn't doing this to embarrass them, that I was trying to be someone I could be proud of. But the words wouldn't come. I just sat there, my hands shaking under the table, feeling smaller than I ever had. After that, everything changed. They didn't just disagree with me. They acted like I'd betrayed them. Mom stopped inviting me to her events. Dad barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was to remind me how I was letting them down. Camille would call just to needle me, saying things like, "Hope you're ready for basic training. Don't cry when they yell at you." Even my friends started pulling away, their parents whispering about how I was throwing my life away. The whole town knew, and it felt like they all had an opinion. I'd walk into the grocery store and catch people staring, their voices low as they talked about that Whitmore girl. I was alone. Really alone. I'd go to my room after school, lock the door, and just sit there, trying to hold on to that spark I'd felt at the recruiting booth. I'd tell myself this was worth it, that I was doing this for me, not them. But it hurt. God, it hurt. I'd hear Mom on the phone, laughing about Camille's wedding plans, or Dad bragging about James's latest deal, and I'd feel like I didn't even belong in my own family. But something else was growing inside me. This resolve, this quiet fire. I started noticing things about myself I hadn't before. Like how I'd always been good at figuring things out, whether it was organizing that food drive or winning debates by seeing 3 steps ahead of my opponent. I'd always been a leader, even if no one in my family saw it. I'd rally my track team when we were down, or get my classmates to pitch in for a cause. I wasn't just some rebellious kid. I had something to offer. And the army? That was my chance to prove it. The day I left for basic training, nobody came to see me off. I stood at the bus station with my duffel bag, the summer air thick and humid, watching families hug their kids goodbye. I kept hoping maybe Mom would show up, or even James, but the bus pulled out, and I was on my own. I sat by the window, watching our town shrink away, and I made a promise to myself. I wasn't doing this for their approval anymore. I was doing it to find my purpose, to be someone I could look in the mirror and respect. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where your own family treated you like you weren't good enough? Where they made you feel like your dreams didn't matter simply because those dreams didn't match their vision for your life? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences matter. When I stepped off that bus at basic training, I was just a 17-year-old kid with a duffel bag and a point to prove. The air was thick with Georgia heat, and the drill sergeants were already barking orders, their voices like thunder cracking over us. I looked around at the other recruits, mostly guys, all sizing each other up, and felt this knot in my stomach. I wasn't just fighting to prove myself to them. I was fighting the echo of my dad's voice calling me a waste, Camille's smirk saying I'd never make it. Basic was brutal. Up at dawn, running till my lungs burned, crawling through mud with a rifle heavier than I expected. The guys didn't make it easy. Some saw me as a target, tossing comments like, "Go home, princess," or, "What's a girl like you doing here?" I didn't cry. I didn't quit. I pushed harder. When we ran obstacle courses, I'd be the first over the wall, even if my arms screamed. When we drilled, I'd memorize every command, every move, until I could do it in my sleep. By week 6, the taunts started fading. One guy, a big Texan named Carter, clapped me on the shoulder after I outshot him at the range and said, "Whitmore, you're all right." That was the first time I felt like I belonged. My first deployment came 2 years later to a dusty base in Afghanistan. Nothing prepares you for that. The heat was suffocating, the air always smelled like diesel and sand, and the tension never let up. You'd hear mortars in the distance and just keep moving, like it was normal. I was a specialist by then, part of a logistics unit, but war doesn't care about your job title. One night, our convoy got hit. Ambush. The crack of gunfire was so loud it drowned out everything else. Our lead vehicle was smoking, and my sergeant was yelling for us to secure the perimeter. I saw one of my guys, a kid named Rodriguez, freeze, his eyes wide with panic. I grabbed him, pulled him behind a rock, and said, "You're with me. We move together." I didn't think, I just acted. We got the wounded out, held the line till backup came. Later, my lieutenant pulled me aside and said, "That was quick thinking, Whitmore. You saved lives today." I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt alive. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about leading. I started noticing how my choices could change things. How a calm word could steady a shaky private, or a split-second call could keep us out of a kill zone. I got good at seeing the bigger picture, at reading terrain, people, situations. My superiors noticed too. I made sergeant faster than most, then staff sergeant. By my second tour, I was leading squads through missions that made my heart pound just thinking about them. Like the time we had to clear a village suspected of harboring insurgents. I had to decide, push forward or hold back. I chose to flank, using the hills for cover. It worked. We got through with no casualties. My captain recommended me for a commendation, said I had a knack for strategy. I tucked that medal away in my footlocker, knowing I couldn't send it home to show Mom. But it wasn't all victories. War takes pieces of you. I lost people. Rodriguez, the kid I'd pulled to safety that first ambush, he didn't make it through our next tour. IED. I saw the blast, felt the ground shake, and when the dust cleared, he was gone. I carried his dog tags back to base, handed them to our CO, and went to my bunk to cry where no one could see. That night, I wondered if I could keep doing this, if I was strong enough. But the next morning, my squad looked to me, waiting for orders. I got up. I kept going. That's what the army taught me. Grief doesn't stop the mission. You carry it and you lead anyway. I pushed myself harder after that. I applied for every advanced training I could. Ranger school was the toughest. 61 days of hell. Starving, sleepless, carrying 60 pounds of gear through swamps and mountains. I was one of the only women there, and the instructors didn't go easy. They'd yell, "Whitmore, you quitting yet?" I'd grit my teeth and keep moving. When I graduated, pin that tab on my uniform. I felt like I'd earned something no one could take away. From there, it was officer candidate school, then specialized courses in counterinsurgency, intelligence, leadership. I soaked it all up, not just to prove I could, but because I loved it. The strategy, the stakes, the way every decision mattered. It was the opposite of the shallow world I'd left behind. My career took off. I made lieutenant, then captain, leading bigger units, tougher missions. By my 30s, I was a major, then a lieutenant colonel, running operations across multiple theaters. I'd brief generals, plan extractions, coordinate with allies. One mission in Syria, we had to evacuate a village under fire. I called in air support, rerouted our convoy, and got everyone out, civilians, my team, all safe. My colonel shook my hand after and said, "Whitmore, you're one of the best I've seen." I got the Bronze Star for that one. It sat in a box with the others, medals I never told my family about. The higher I climbed, the more I gave up. I missed birthdays, weddings, Thanksgivings. I spent Christmases on base, eating MREs with my troops, laughing about bad coffee and worse weather. I didn't date much. Relationships don't last when you're gone half the year. I'd see my soldiers video call their kids, their spouses, and I'd feel this ache. I wanted that normal life sometimes, but I chose the mission instead. My family didn't even notice I was gone. They'd send generic holiday cards, addressed to Alyssa. No rank, no mention of my life. Camille's letters were the worst, always dripping with pity, like, "Hope you're doing okay out there." Ryan says it's tough for enlisted folks. She had no idea I was outranking her husband by then. The gap between my world and theirs kept growing. They still saw me as the screw-up who ran off to play soldier. I'd hear through the grapevine about James's big finance deals, Camille's law firm, Ryan's promotions. Mom would call once a year, asking when I'd come home and settle down. I'd say, "I'm good, Mom," and change the subject. I didn't tell them about the commendations, the missions, the lives I'd saved. I didn't tell them because I knew they wouldn't care. Or worse, they'd twist it, make it about how I'd embarrass them by choosing this life. There were nights I doubted myself. I'd sit in my quarters, staring at photos of my squad, my medals, and wonder if it was worth it. No family, no home to go back to, just the army. But then I'd think about my troops. The way they looked to me in a firefight, trusting I'd get them through. The way Carter, now a sergeant himself, would grin and say, "Man, you're still the toughest bastard I know." They were my family. They kept me going when I wanted to give up. The day I made Brigadier General was the loneliest. I was 34, standing in a Pentagon office, getting my star pinned on by a 4-star general who said, "Whitmore, you're a credit to the service." I smiled, thanked him, and walked out to an empty hallway. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, Mom, Dad, Camille, James, and realized I had no one to call. They didn't even know I'd made Colonel, let alone this. I went back to my hotel, ordered a burger, and toasted myself with a beer. It was bittersweet. I'd done the impossible, but I'd done it alone. I decided then to keep it secret. Not out of spite, but because it was mine. My family had spent years telling me I'd fail, and now I'd succeeded beyond anything they could imagine. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my troops, my mission, my purpose. That was enough. At least I told myself it was. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever achieved something incredible but couldn't share it with the people you most wanted to impress? What was that achievement? And how did it feel to celebrate alone while the people who doubted you continued to underestimate you? Let me know in the comments below. I was in my office at the Pentagon when the call came. It was a Tuesday, the air crisp with early fall, my desk buried under maps and briefing notes. My phone buzzed, and I saw James's name on the screen. My brother never called. I picked up, and his voice was low, almost formal. "Alyssa, it's Mom. She had a stroke. She's gone." Just like that, the world tilted. I sat there, staring at the wall, my pen still in my hand, trying to process it. Mom was dead. The woman who'd shaped so much of my life, her expectations, her disappointment, was just gone. I didn't cry right away. I wanted to, but it wouldn't come. Instead, I felt this tangle of emotions I couldn't unravel. Grief, sure, but it was mixed with something heavier. Old pain, resentment, memories I'd buried. I kept hearing Mom's voice from years ago, soft but cutting, saying, "Alyssa, you're embarrassing us. Why can't you be more like Camille?" I saw her at those country club brunches, smiling tightly when someone asked about me, brushing it off with, "Oh, Alyssa's doing her own thing." I'd spent years telling myself I didn't care, but now she was gone, and I realized I'd always hoped for something different. A moment where she'd see me, really see me. Now that chance was gone too. For days, I wrestled with whether to go to the funeral. I was a brigadier general now, with a team counting on me, missions stacking up. I could have stayed away, kept my distance like I had for over a decade.
Part of me wanted to.
Why go back to a family that had written me off? To a town that had whispered about my failure? I'd built a life without them. Medals, promotions, a purpose they'd never understand. But another part of me, the part that still remembered Mom teaching me to ride a bike or sneaking me cookies when Dad wasn't looking, wouldn't let it go. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't expect apologies. I just needed closure, to stand in that space one last time and let it go. I decided to go, but I wasn't going as the Alyssa they remembered. I pulled my dress uniform from the closet, the dark blue jacket heavy with ribbons and decorations, Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Ranger Tab, all the markers of a life they knew nothing about. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my star, my ribbons perfectly aligned, my boots polished to a mirror shine. This wasn't just a uniform. It was me, the real me, the woman I'd fought to become. I wasn't showing up to prove anything to them. I was showing up for me, to walk into that room as the person I'd built, not the failure they'd labeled me. The trip back to my hometown felt like stepping into a memory. I flew into Chicago, then drove the 3 hours to our little Midwestern town, the kind of place where everyone knows your business. The fields stretched out flat and golden, the air smelling of cut grass and diesel from passing trucks. I passed the high school, the diner where I'd hung out with friends, the library where I'd escaped as a kid. Each place brought back a sting. Camille's laughter when I said I wanted to enlist, Dad's lectures about potential, Mom's sighs when I didn't wear the right dress. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, telling myself I wasn't that girl anymore. When I got to town, I noticed things had changed, but not much. The main street had a new coffee shop, but the same old hardware store still sat on the corner. The Whitmore name was still everywhere. Dad's real estate signs, Mom's wellness studio now run by someone else. I checked into a hotel, not the family house. I wasn't ready to face them there. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd find at the funeral. Would Dad still look at me like I was a disappointment? Would Camille still have that smug edge? Her and Ryan acting like they owned the room? I didn't know, but I felt the weight of it all, like I was carrying my entire career into a place that had never cared to see it. The morning of the funeral, I got ready like I was going into battle. I put on my uniform, every detail perfect, cuffs crisp, medals gleaming, my general's star shining on my shoulder. I stood in front of the mirror again, and for a moment, I saw the 17-year-old who'd left for basic training, scared but determined. I wasn't her anymore, but I carried her with me. I drove to the funeral home, the streets quiet except for the hum of my rental car. I parked and sat there, hands on the wheel, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about saying goodbye to Mom. It was about walking into a room full of people who'd spent years dismissing me, carrying the full weight of my military bearing into a space that had never understood it. The funeral home was a low brick building, surrounded by neatly trimmed hedges and a parking lot full of cars. I could see people inside through the windows, moving slowly, dressed in black. I knew my family would be there, Dad with his stern face, Camille with Ryan, probably James too. I'd heard Ryan was a lieutenant colonel now, bringing his Air Force buddies to pay respects. I wondered if Camille still bragged about him like she did when we were younger. I wondered if they'd even recognize me. I took a deep breath, feeling the star on my shoulder like an anchor. This wasn't just about me anymore. I was representing something bigger, my troops, my service, every soldier who'd trusted me to lead them. I wasn't here to start a fight or settle scores. I was here to stand in my truth, to say goodbye to Mom, and to close a chapter I'd been carrying too long. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots, and walked toward the doors. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I was ready. Have you ever walked into a room where people expected you to be the same person you were years ago, but you'd completely transformed? How did you handle showing up as your new self in an old environment where people had fixed ideas about who you were? Share your transformation story below. I walked through the doors of the funeral home, my boots clicking on the polished wood floor, the air thick with the scent of lilies and hushed voices. My dress uniform felt like armor, dark blue, starched crisp, my general's star gleaming on my shoulder, ribbons and medals catching the soft light. I stood tall, shoulders back, every step deliberate, carrying the weight of 17 years of service. The room was crowded, people milling around in black suits and dresses, their conversations a low hum. I saw familiar faces, neighbors, old family friends, but their eyes slid over me, not quite registering who I was. I wasn't the Alyssa they remembered, the scrawny kid who'd run off to the army. I was something else now, someone they couldn't place. I scanned the room. Dad was near the front, by Mom's casket, his face as stern as ever, talking to some business associate with a whiskey glass in his hand. Camille was off to the side, fussing with her pearl necklace, her black dress tailored to perfection. Her husband, Ryan Prescott, was with a group of Air Force officers, all in their dress blues, their polished shoes reflecting the chandelier light. Ryan was holding court, his laugh carrying over the crowd, confident as always. James, my brother, stood alone near a window, staring out, his suit crisp but his face tired. They hadn't seen me yet. I felt this strange mix of nerves and calm, like I was stepping into a mission I'd prepped for, but couldn't fully predict. I took a step forward, and that's when it started. A few heads turned. An older woman, one of Mom's country club friends, squinted at me, her lips parting in confusion. A man I vaguely recognized from church whispered to his wife, his eyes flicking to my medals. I kept moving, my posture military precise, my face composed. I could feel the room shifting, like a ripple spreading through water, but my family still hadn't noticed. I was halfway across the room when Ryan's eyes landed on me. He was mid-sentence, gesturing to one of his buddies, when his gaze caught mine. His smile froze. His hand dropped to his side, and I saw it, the slow dawn of recognition. His eyes widened, flicking from my face to the star on my shoulder, then to the rows of ribbons on my chest. His face went pale, like the blood had drained out of him. I kept walking, steady, toward the casket, but I could see him out of the corner of my eye, his body stiffening, his jaw working like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then it happened. Ryan's military training kicked in, overriding whatever shock or disbelief he felt. He snapped to attention, his heels clicking together, his hand flying up in a sharp salute. His voice boomed across the room, cutting through every conversation like a blade. "General Whitmore, ma'am." The room went silent. Every head turned. The Air Force officers around Ryan didn't hesitate. They followed suit, snapping to attention, salutes crisp and uniform, their eyes locked on me. The sound of their heels clicking echoed in the stillness. I stopped, standing by Mom's casket, and turned to face them. I nodded, my voice calm but firm. "At ease, gentlemen." They lowered their hands, but their eyes stayed on me, a mix of respect and astonishment. I looked at my family. Camille's face was ashen, her hands frozen on her necklace, her mouth open like she couldn't find air. She stammered, "Alyssa? What is this?" Her voice was high, almost accusing, like I'd pulled some kind of trick. Dad's reaction was worse. His whiskey glass slipped from his hand, hitting the carpet with a dull thud, amber liquid soaking into the fibers. His face was red, his eyes wide, like he was seeing me for the first time. James just stood there, his arms crossed, his jaw tight, staring at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. The room was buzzing now, whispers spreading like wildfire. I heard fragments. General? Whitmore? Alyssa? As people leaned into each other, their voices low but urgent. Mom's old friends were clutching their purses, their eyes darting between me and my family. The funeral director, a thin man in a black suit, hovered nearby, looking like he didn't know whether to intervene or stay out of it. Ryan's Air Force buddies were still watching me, their faces a mix of awe and confusion, like they were trying to reconcile the woman in front of them with whatever stories they'd heard. Inside, I was a storm. Part of me felt vindicated, like all those years of pain, of being called a failure, had just been erased in one moment. I dreamed of this, of them seeing me for who I'd become. But there was grief too, heavy and raw, because Mom wasn't here to see it. And under it all, a quiet resolve. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to say goodbye, to stand in my truth, to carry my service with pride. I kept my face steady, my bearing military, even as my heart pounded. People started approaching me, hesitant at first. One of Ryan's officers, a young captain with a buzz cut, stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, it's an honor. I heard about your work in Syria." I nodded, thanked him, kept my voice even. Others followed, townsfolk, old neighbors, even some of Mom's friends, their voices soft, almost reverent. "Alyssa, we had no idea. You're a general?" I smiled, polite but distant, saying things like, "Thank you for being here for Mom." I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them anything. My family was another story. Camille was the first to try. She came up to me, her heels clicking, her face still pale, but trying to pull it together. "Alyssa, why didn't you tell us? A general? How did this happen?" Her voice was shaky, like she was torn between shock and wanting to take control. I looked at her, saw the sister who'd mocked me, who'd said I'd learned to mop floors, and said, "I've been busy, Camille. Serving." It wasn't harsh, just true. She flinched, like I'd slapped her, and stepped back.
Dad was next.
He walked over, his face still flushed, his hands clenched like he didn't know what to do with them. "Alyssa," he said, his voice rough, you should have told us." He trailed off, like he couldn't find the words. I met his eyes, the same eyes that had judged me my whole life, and said, "I did what I needed to do, Dad. For me." He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned away, his shoulders hunched. I saw James watching from across the room, still silent, his face unreadable. He didn't come over. I didn't expect him to.
The room had changed.
People moved differently now, giving me space, their glances lingering. Ryan stayed with his officers, but I caught him looking at me, his face tight, like he was still processing that I outranked him. Camille hovered near Dad, whispering to him, her hands gesturing wildly. I heard snatches of their talk. How could she not tell us? What does this mean? But I tuned it out. I stood by Mom's casket, looking at her face, so still, so familiar. I whispered, "I made it, Mom. I wish you could have seen." My throat tightened, but I swallowed it down. The rest of the funeral was a blur. People paid their respects, some to Mom, some to me. I stayed professional, shaking hands, nodding, thanking them for coming. But inside, I was reeling. This moment, this revelation, it was everything I'd never let myself want. My family's shock, their sudden need to rewrite who I was, it felt like justice, but it didn't heal the ache. I'd spent years building a life without them, and now they were scrambling to catch up. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. I wasn't the girl they'd dismissed anymore. I was General Whitmore, and I'd earned every inch of it. Imagine you just witnessed someone you completely underestimated reveal they were actually incredibly successful and accomplished. How would you react? Would you immediately try to apologize, make excuses for your past behavior, or attempt to downplay their achievement? Be honest in the comments. There's no judgment here, just curiosity about human nature. I was back at the Pentagon, barely a week after Mom's funeral, when everything started to unravel. My office was a fortress of papers, reports, maps, encrypted files stacked on my desk, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the late hours. I'd been assigned to a classified investigation, one so sensitive it came straight from the top. Military contractor corruption, they said. Billions in defense funds siphoned off through shady deals, substandard equipment, ghost contracts. It was the kind of case that could shake national security, ruin careers, send people to prison. I was leading a small task force, handpicked for our discretion and track record. We were digging into a web of companies, shell corporations, and backroom deals, and I knew it was going to be messy. What I didn't know was how personal it was about to get. It started with a name, Derek Glade, a slick contractor with a reputation for winning big military housing contracts. His company, Glade Enterprises, was everywhere, building bases, officer quarters, even family housing for troops. On paper, he was a patriot, delivering homes for soldiers. But our intel showed something else. Overpriced contracts, shoddy construction, money funneled through offshore accounts. I was poring over financials one night, my laptop screen glowing in the dark, when I saw something that made my stomach drop. A real estate transfer linked to one of Glade's shell companies. The address was familiar. Too familiar. It was one of Dad's properties, a strip mall he'd bragged about acquiring years ago. I sat back, my heart pounding. Dad's real estate empire was his pride, the foundation of the Whitmore name. He'd built it from nothing, or so he said, buying up half our county, leasing to big chains, flipping properties for millions. But as I dug deeper, the connections kept coming. More properties, more deals, all tied to Glade's network. Payments funneled through LLCs, leases that didn't add up, accounts that screamed money laundering. I felt sick. My father, the man who'd lectured me about wasting potential, was tangled up in something dirty. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was staring me in the face. Then it got worse. I was cross-referencing contracts when I found a link to Ryan's Air Force unit. Ryan Prescott, my sister's husband, the guy who'd saluted me at the funeral like his life depended on it. His unit had been getting equipment, radios, drones, transport vehicles, from one of Glade's subsidiaries. Substandard gear, overpriced by millions, failing in the field. I saw reports of malfunctions, delays, even a crash that injured 2 pilots. Ryan's name wasn't on the contracts, but his unit was caught in the fallout. I sat there, staring at the files, my coffee going cold. My brother-in-law, the Golden Boy officer, was tied to this mess, even if he didn't know it. And then there was Camille, my sister, the perfect lawyer, always so smug about her big law firm job. I was pulling records on Glade's legal representation when her firm's name popped up. They'd handled contracts, mergers, even defended Glade in a whistleblower case. Camille herself had signed off on some of the documents. I could see her in my mind, sitting in her sleek office, her pearl necklace catching the light, thinking she was untouchable. She probably had no idea what she was facilitating, but her work was helping Glade move money, hide assets, keep the scheme running. My family, Dad, Camille, Ryan, they were all caught in this web and they didn't even know it. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was my family. The people who dismissed me, mocked me, written me off, they were part of the very corruption I was tasked to dismantle. I felt this sick mix of betrayal and duty. Part of me wanted to call them, demand answers, shake them until they saw what they'd done. But I couldn't. This was classified, locked down tight. One wrong move, and the whole investigation could collapse. People could get hurt, soldiers, civilians, my own team. I had to stay sharp, keep my cover, even as I was staring at evidence that my family's success, their perfect Whitmore legacy, might be built on fraud. I started digging deeper, working late into the night, my office a cocoon of fluorescent light and coffee cups. I pulled bank records, property deeds, contract bids. I had my team run surveillance, tapping phones, tracking Glade's meetings. We found a pattern: housing contracts awarded to Glade's companies, tied to properties Dad owned. Money flowed through shell companies, back to Glade, then out to offshore accounts. Dad's strip malls, his office parks, even the old family cabin. They were fronts, laundering cash while troops lived in crumbling barracks. I found emails where Camille's firm negotiated terms, burying red flags in legal jargon.
And Ryan's unit?
They were stuck with gear so bad it endangered lives, all because Glade's companies cut corners to pad profits. The moral weight hit me hard. I'd spent years in war zones, making split-second calls to save lives, but this was different. Every piece of evidence I uncovered was another step toward destroying my family. Dad could go to jail. Camille could lose her career, maybe face charges. Ryan's reputation, his unit's safety, all at risk. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I could do this. Could I bring down the people who'd raised me, even if they'd never believed in me? I thought about Mom, how she died not knowing who I'd become, and now I was about to tear apart her legacy too. It felt like betraying her all over again. But then I'd think about my troops. The soldiers who'd trusted me, who died because of bad calls or bad gear. I thought about Rodriguez, his dog tag still in my desk drawer, and the pilots injured because of Glade's junk equipment. This wasn't just about my family. It was about justice, about the oath I'd taken to protect my country, my people. I couldn't walk away, no matter how much it hurt. I had to keep going, even if it meant losing whatever was left of the Whitmores. I started planning, careful and strategic, like I was running a mission. I kept my team tight, only sharing what they needed to know. We set up discreet surveillance on Dad's properties, tapped into Glade's communications, built a case piece by piece. I had to be invisible, even to my family. I couldn't call Camille and ask about her firm's clients. I couldn't confront Dad about his deals. I couldn't warn Ryan his unit was being screwed over. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, balancing my duty as a general with the weight of being their daughter, their sister. One night, I was in my office, going through photos from a surveillance op, pictures of Dad meeting Glade at one of his properties, shaking hands like old friends. I stared at the image, my chest tight. I remembered Dad teaching me to fish at that cabin, his rare smile, when I caught my first trout. Now that same cabin was a front for laundering money. I thought about Camille, how she'd always been the favorite, how I'd envied her confidence. Now she was caught up in something that could ruin her. And Ryan, who'd saluted me at the funeral, his face pale with shock. He was a pawn in this too, his career at risk because of Glade's greed. I felt the walls closing in. I was a general used to leading under fire, but this was different. This was personal. I'd spent years proving I didn't need my family's approval, but now I was facing the possibility of destroying them to do my job. I didn't know if I could live with that, but I didn't know if I could live with walking away either. I kept working, kept building the case, kept telling myself it was about the bigger picture. But every piece of evidence was a reminder that the Whitmore name, the one they'd been so proud of, was rotten at its core. Sometimes when we finally stand up for ourselves, we discover the situation was even worse than we thought. Have you ever had a moment where you realize someone's betrayal or deception went deeper than you initially knew? How did you handle that discovery when it involved people you cared about? Share below. I never thought I'd be sitting across a table from my family, not as their daughter or sister, but as the general leading an investigation that could ruin them. It was a sterile conference room in D.C., the kind with gray carpet and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, the air smelling faintly of coffee and old paper. My team had set it up, secure, off the books, no one but us, and the people we needed to question. Dad was there, his suit wrinkled, his face harder than I'd ever seen it. Camille sat next to him, her hands clasped tight, her lawyer face on but her eyes nervous. Ryan was in his Air Force uniform, his posture stiff, like he was reporting for duty. James was there too, quiet as always, his tie loosened, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. And me? I was at the head of the table, in my dress blues, my general's star gleaming, a stack of classified files in front of me. This wasn't a family reunion. This was work. I'd had to tell them. There was no way around it. The investigation into Derek Glade's corruption had gone too deep, and their names, Dad's properties, Camille's law firm, Ryan's unit, were all over the evidence. I'd called them to DC, told them it was urgent, but I didn't say why until we were in that room. I looked at them, my voice steady, and said, "I'm leading an investigation into military contractor fraud. It's classified, and it involves all of you." The silence was deafening. Camille's mouth opened, then closed, like she couldn't find words. Dad's face went red, his hands gripping the table. "What the hell are you talking about, Alyssa?" he said, his voice low, like I'd accused him of something personal. Ryan just stared, his eyes flicking to my star, then back to my face, like he was recalculating everything he knew about me. James leaned forward, finally speaking. "You're saying we're suspects." I explained it as clearly as I could without breaching security. Glade's company, the shady contracts, the money laundering through Dad's properties, the substandard gear hurting Ryan's unit, Camille's firm facilitating the deals. I kept it professional, no emotion, just facts. But inside, I was a mess. These were the people who'd called me a failure, who'd mocked me for joining the army, and now I was the one holding their futures in my hands. Camille was the first to react, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous, Alyssa. My firm represents dozens of clients. You're saying I'm involved in some conspiracy?" Dad jumped in, his tone bitter. "You're out of your depth, Alyssa. You don't know how business works." Ryan didn't say anything, but I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes locked on me, like he was waiting for what came next. I took a breath and said, "You're not suspects. You're witnesses. But I need your cooperation, or this gets worse for everyone." That shut them up. I laid out what I needed: Dad's real estate records, Camille's client files, Ryan's unit reports on equipment failures. I saw the moment it hit them that I wasn't just their screw-up sister or daughter. I was the one in charge, and this was bigger than any of us. Ryan was the first to step up. He leaned forward, his voice steady military. "General Whitmore, my units had issues with gear for years. If this is connected, I'll get you whatever you need." I nodded, grateful for his honor, even if it stung to hear him call me by my rank. Camille was next, though it took her longer. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrow, and said, "I'll need to clear this with my partners, but I can get you the files. If you're wrong, Alyssa, this could ruin me." I met her gaze and said, "I'm not wrong, Camille, but I need you to trust me." Dad was the hardest. He just stared at the table, his hands clenched, then muttered, "I'll get you the records. But don't think this changes anything." James didn't commit, just nodded, like he was still processing. We started working together, and it was surreal. We met in that conference room for days, poring over documents, cross-referencing contracts, tracing money trails. I'd lay out what we knew: Glade shell companies, the offshore accounts, the properties Dad had leased to him. Camille's legal expertise came in handy. She'd point out clauses in contracts, loopholes Glade exploited, her voice grudging at first but sharp, focused. "This is sloppy," she said one day, flipping through a file. "They buried the payments in escrow accounts. I should have caught this." I saw her look at me, a flicker of respect in her eyes, like she was seeing my thoroughness for the first time. Ryan was a soldier through and through. He brought detailed logs from his unit, equipment failures, delivery delays, even a report on that crash I'd read about. "This cost us good people," he said, his voice tight, handing me a stack of papers. I nodded, meeting his eyes, and said, "I know. We're gonna fix this." I saw something shift in him, like he was starting to see me not just as his sister-in-law, but as a leader. He'd watch me run the room, coordinating with my team, asking precise questions, and I'd catch him nodding, like he was impressed. Dad was the toughest. He'd sit there, arms crossed, handing over property deeds and bank statements, his face like stone. But one day, we were going through a lease agreement tied to Glade, and I pointed out how the numbers didn't add up. "This property's rent is triple market value," I said. "It's a front." Dad looked at the paper, his eyes narrowing, and said, "I trusted my accountants. I didn't know." For the first time, I heard something like doubt in his voice, like he was seeing me as more than the kid he'd written off. He started asking questions, real ones, about how the laundering worked, and I explained, patient but firm, walking him through the evidence. Those sessions were tense, but something started to change. They saw me work, how I kept my team focused, how I pieced together complex financial trails, how I stayed calm even when the stakes were sky high. Camille would lean over my shoulder, pointing out a discrepancy, and I'd nod, incorporate it, keep moving. Ryan would chime in with details from his unit, and I'd weave it into our case, showing how it fit. Dad, grudgingly, started volunteering information like he was starting to trust my judgment. I kept my feelings locked down, stayed professional, but inside, it was a storm. These were the people who'd hurt me, who'd never believed in me, and now they were relying on me to navigate this mess. There were moments we actually worked like a team. One night, we were all in that room, takeout containers scattered on the table, the clock pushing midnight. Camille found a contract that linked Glade to an offshore account, and she looked at me, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "You're good at this, Alyssa. Really good." Ryan nodded, adding, "I've served under a lot of officers. You're one of the best." Even Dad, usually silent, looked up and said, "You've got a head for this." I didn't see it before. I didn't let myself react, just said, "Thanks. Let's keep going." But those words hit deep. They were starting to see me, not the failure, but the leader I'd become. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. There was too much history, too much pain. But working together, chasing the truth, we were building something. Trust, maybe. Respect, definitely. They were seeing my sacrifices, the years away, the holidays spent on base, the lives I'd saved, the weight of my star. I was seeing them differently, too. Camille wasn't just the smug sister anymore. She was sharp, useful, human. Ryan wasn't just the perfect officer. He was a soldier who cared about his people. Dad wasn't just the stern mogul. He was a man who'd been blindsided, maybe even betrayed by his own trust in Glade. I guided them through the case, explaining the stakes, the national security angle, the soldiers who'd suffered because of this fraud. I kept it clear, patient, even when Camille pushed back or Dad got defensive. They were starting to get it, not just the case, but me, my commitment, my duty, the life I'd built. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, I felt like they were starting to understand what I'd given up to become who I was. Have you ever had to work closely with someone who hurt you in the past? How did you balance protecting yourself emotionally while still being effective professionally? What did that experience teach you about forgiveness and moving forward? Let me know in the comments. The pieces were finally coming together, and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd ever imagined. I was in my office, the clock ticking past midnight, my desk buried under files, surveillance photos, and decrypted emails. My team and I had been working around the clock, chasing every lead in the military contractor fraud case, and it all pointed to one man, Derek Glade. He wasn't just a shady businessman. He was the mastermind, the spider at the center of a web that stretched across military bases, corporations, and most painfully, my own family. We'd built an ironclad case. Bank records showed millions funneled through Glade shell companies, tied to overpriced contracts for housing and equipment. Surveillance caught him meeting with defense officials, slipping bribes in sleek briefcases. Wiretaps revealed him orchestrating deals, his voice smooth and calculated, promising kickbacks to anyone who played along. But what hit me hardest was how he'd targeted the Whitmores. It wasn't random. Glade had seen our family status, our connections, and he'd played us like pawns. Dad's real estate empire was his first mark. Glade had approached him years ago, all charm and big promises, offering lucrative leases for his properties. Dad, always hungry for the next deal, didn't question why a strip mall was worth triple market value. I found emails where Glade flattered him, called him a pillar of the community, feeding his ego while using his properties to launder money. Dad thought he was building his legacy, but he was a front, washing dirty cash through office parks and retail lots. Camille was next. Glade's company hired her law firm, banking on her ambition and her need to prove herself. He'd send her contracts to review, burying the fraud in fine print, knowing she'd sign off without digging too deep. She told me later, her voice shaky, he'd call me personally Alyssa. Said I was the best lawyer he'd ever worked with. I thought I was helping a legit client. She didn't know her work was hiding millions in illegal transfers, keeping Glade's scheme airtight. Ryan's unit was the final piece. Glade's companies supplied their equipment, radios, drones, vehicles, all substandard, overpriced junk. I found reports showing Glade had pulled strings to get Ryan's unit assigned to specific contracts, ensuring the faulty gear went to them. Ryan was furious when I showed him the evidence. My people got hurt because of this, he said, his voice tight. I trusted the system. Glade had played on Ryan's loyalty, his faith in the chain of command, to keep the scam running without suspicion. The worst part? Glade knew exactly how to manipulate each of them. He'd studied our family, our weaknesses. Dad's pride in his empire. Camille's drive to be the best. Ryan's sense of duty. He'd woven them into his scheme, keeping them in the dark while using their success to fuel his fraud. It wasn't just our family either. His operations spanned multiple bases, from Fort Bragg to Camp Pendleton, affecting thousands of troops with crumbling housing and equipment that failed when it mattered most. I sat with my family in that DC conference room, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee and tension. I laid it all out. Glade's scheme, how he'd used them, the scope of the damage. Dad's face went pale, his hands gripping a stack of his own property deeds. I thought he was a partner, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Camille stared at her laptop, her fingers frozen on the keys, and said, I signed those contracts. I didn't know. Ryan just shook his head, his jaw clenched, muttering, This explains everything. James, quiet as always, looked at me and said, You're saying we were all played? I nodded. You weren't guilty. You were victims. The relief in the room was palpable, but it came with a sting. They'd been used, their ambitions twisted to serve Glade's greed. I saw Dad's shoulders slump, like the weight of his empire had turned to ash. Camille's eyes were wet, her usual confidence gone. Ryan looked at me, his voice steady but raw. What's next, General? That word, General, hit different now. It wasn't just respect. It was trust. I'd been building the case for weeks, methodically, like a mission. My team had wiretaps, bank records, even a whistleblower from Glade's company who'd turned over internal emails. We tracked his movements, caught him meeting a shady subcontractor in a hotel parking lot, the flash of cash changing hands. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall, and I was determined to make it unbreakable. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about the soldiers who'd lived in shoddy barracks, the pilots injured in that crash, the lives lost because of Glade's greed. The day of the arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. I wasn't there. My team handled the takedown, FBI agents swarming Glade's office while he was mid-meeting, cuffing him as his assistants scrambled. I got the call in my office, my deputy saying, He's in custody, ma'am. It's over. We'd recovered millions in stolen funds, seized equipment, shut down his network. Bases were already getting replacement gear, housing contracts redirected to honest companies. It was a win, clean and professional, the kind of victory I'd built my career on. But it didn't feel like a victory, not completely. I sat at my desk, staring at a photo of my team, my medals pinned to the wall behind me. I'd done my duty, exposed the truth, protected the people who counted on me. But the cost was heavy. My family had been pawns in Glade's game, their lives tangled in his lies. I'd saved them from charges, but I'd also exposed their vulnerabilities, their blind spots. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about justice, about making things right for the soldiers who'd suffered. I met with my family one last time, before they left DC. The conference room was quieter now, the tension replaced by something softer. Dad looked at me, his eyes tired but clear, and said, Alyssa, I didn't understand what you were doing all these years. I was wrong. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was close. Camille reached across the table, her voice low. You saved us. I don't know how to thank you. Ryan stood, saluted, and said, "You're a hell of a leader, ma'am. I'm proud to know you." James just nodded, but I saw something new in his eyes. Respect. Maybe even admiration. They were starting to see me, not as the kid who'd disappointed them, but as the woman who'd stood for something bigger. My integrity, my commitment to duty, it wasn't just about the army. It was who I was. They saw the sacrifices I'd made, the years I'd spent fighting for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. For the first time, I felt like they understood what drove me, why I'd chosen this life. I walked them to the elevator, the Pentagon's halls quiet around us. We didn't hug or make promises to stay in touch. But there was a shift, a seed of something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a shared understanding. We'd been through a fire together, and we'd come out changed. I watched them go, my heart heavy but steady, knowing I'd done what I had to do. Have you ever discovered that someone was manipulating a situation or a relationship behind the scenes, making you question everything you thought you knew? How did that revelation change your perspective on past events and relationships? Share your story of discovering hidden manipulation below. It was a chilly evening in DC, the kind where the air smells faintly of fallen leaves and city streets. I was back in my hotel room after the investigation wrapped, sitting on the edge of the bed. My uniform jacket draped over a chair, its metals catching the dim light. The case was done. Derek Glade was in custody, his empire crumbling, and my family was cleared. But there was one thing left to settle, something heavier than any mission I'd ever faced. I had to talk to them, really talk, not as General Whitmore, but as Alyssa, their daughter, their sister. They'd asked to meet, just the family, no files or evidence between us. I agreed, but my heart was pounding as I drove to the small restaurant they'd picked, a quiet place with warm lights and the faint clink of dishes in the background. We sat at a corner table, the five of us, Dad, Camille, Ryan, James, and me, surrounded by the murmur of other diners. The tablecloth was crisp white, the candle in the center flickering, casting shadows on our faces. It felt strange, almost unreal, to be here with them after so many years of silence. I could still hear their old words in my head, Dad's lectures, Camille's mockery, James's quiet indifference. But now, they were looking at me differently, like they were seeing me for the first time.
I didn't know where to start, but Dad did.
He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice low and rough. "Alyssa, I failed you," he said. "I pushed you to be something you weren't, because I thought that's what success looked like. I cared more about how he looked to the world than who you were." His eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen before, regret. I was wrong. You're more than I ever gave you credit for. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I'd waited years for those words, but they didn't erase the pain, not yet. I nodded and said, "I appreciate that, Dad." It hurt, feeling like I was never enough. Camille went next, her hands fidgeting with her napkin, her usual polish gone. "I was awful to you," she said, her voice breaking. "I mocked you, Alyssa, because I was jealous. You were so sure of yourself, even when we all told you you'd fail. I couldn't handle that. I was insecure, and I took it out on you." Her eyes were wet, and she looked at me, raw and open. "I'm so sorry. I should have been your sister, not your critic." I felt a pang, remembering her cruel words about mopping floors, but I saw her now, not as the perfect sister, but as someone who'd been struggling too. I reached across the table, touched her hand, and said, "I hear you, Camille. Thank you." Ryan was quieter, but his words carried weight. He looked at me, his Air Force posture still there, but his eyes softer. "I didn't know you, Alyssa." "Not really. I bought into the family story about you, and I was wrong. Working with you on this case, seeing how you lead, how you think, I'm proud to call you family." He smiled, a real one, not the polished officer grin. "You're one hell of a general, and a better sister-in-law than I deserve." I smiled back, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. "Thanks, Ryan. That means a lot." James was the last, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I didn't say much back then," he said, his eyes on the table. "I didn't stick up for you, and I should have. I saw how they treated you, and I just stayed out of it. I'm sorry, Alyssa. It was simple, but it hit deep. James had always been the silent one, the one who didn't pick fights, but his silence had hurt just as much. I nodded and said, I see you now, James. That's a start. They wanted to know more, to understand what I'd been through. So I told them, for the first time, what those 17 years had really cost me. I talked about the loneliness of basic training, standing at the bus station with no one to see me off. I told them about my first deployment, the fear of gunfire, the weight of losing soldiers like Rodriguez. I shared the missed milestones, birthdays spent in bunkers, Christmases with MREs instead of mom's turkey, the day I made general and had no one to call. I told them about the nights I doubted myself, wondering if I'd chosen the right path, and how my troops, my military family, kept me going. I didn't hold back the pain of their dismissal, how it felt to be erased from their lives because I didn't fit their mold. They listened, really listened. I saw Dad's face soften, his hands unclenching. Camille's eyes were red, her hand still gripping mine. Ryan nodded like he understood the weight of duty. James looked at me, his usual reserve gone, replaced by something like awe. They were starting to get it, what it meant to choose duty over approval, to build a life on my own terms, to carry the cost of that choice alone. I set boundaries clear and firm. I'm open to rebuilding, I said, but it's gotta be different. No more judgment, no more expectations about who I should be. I'm a soldier, a general, and that's not changing. I need you to respect that. They nodded and Camille said, We will, Alyssa. I promise. Dad added, You're part of this family, always. We want you at Thanksgiving, at weddings, all of it. Ryan chimed in, and I'm telling my unit about you. They'll want to meet the general who saved us. James just said, I'm in, whatever it takes. I didn't rush to forgive. I told them, I hear your apologies and I'm grateful, but trust takes time. Let's build it together, step by step. They agreed and I saw something new in their eyes, commitment, not just to me, but to changing how we'd been. They wanted me in their lives, not as the old Alyssa they dismissed, but as the woman I was now. They talked about family dinners, about visiting me at my base, about learning what my world was like. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. I left that dinner feeling lighter, like I'd set down a weight I'd carried too long. I wasn't naive. Years of hurt don't vanish with a few words. But there was hope, a chance for something real, built on mutual respect instead of old patterns. I drove back to my hotel, the city lights blurring past, thinking about Mom, about how she'd never seen this moment. I hoped she'd be proud, not just of me, but of all of us, trying to be better. When someone who hurt you finally understands what they did and offers a genuine apology, how do you respond? Is immediate forgiveness expected, or is it okay to need time to rebuild trust? What's been your experience with the complex process of family forgiveness? 6 months after the investigation, I found myself back in our hometown, pulling up to Dad's big colonial house for a family dinner. It was spring now, the air warm with the smell of blooming lilacs. The lawn still perfectly manicured, but somehow less imposing. I wasn't in my uniform this time, just jeans and a sweater, my hair loose, a real smile tugging at my lips. It felt strange, walking up those steps not as General Whitmore, but just Alyssa coming home. Inside, the house was alive with noise, clinking glasses, laughter, the sizzle of something cooking in the kitchen. Dad greeted me at the door, his face softer than I'd ever seen, and pulled me into a quick hug. Good to have you here, Alyssa, he said, his voice warm. The living room was different now. On the mantel, next to Mom's old crystal vases, sat a display of my military awards, my Bronze Star, my Ranger Tab, my General's Star gleaming under the light. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a statement. They were proud of me. Camille's kids, Emma and Jack, came barreling over, their eyes wide with excitement. Aunt General, Emma shouted, dragging her friend over. This is my aunt. She's a general in the army. Her friend's jaw dropped, and I laughed, ruffling Emma's hair. Just Aunt Alyssa today, kiddo, I said, but I could see the pride in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was a superhero. Camille watched from across the room, her smile soft, and said, "They've been telling everyone at school about you." I caught her eye and nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't known with her before. Dinner was loud, messy, perfect. We sat around the big oak table, plates piled with roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Mom used to make. Dad turned to me at one point, his voice casual but serious. "Alyssa, I'm thinking about selling the old office park. What do you think? Good move or not?" I was stunned. He'd never asked my opinion on business before. I leaned back, thought it through, and said, "Depends on the market. If you're diversifying, it's smart, but hold off till interest rates drop." He nodded, like he was actually listening, and said, "You've got a good head for this." I smiled, feeling something settle inside me. Ryan was there, out of uniform, but we slipped into shop talk anyway. Over dessert, he leaned over and said, "I'm working on a new logistics plan for my unit. Got any tips on streamlining supply chains?" I grinned, loving the chance to talk strategy as equals. "Keep your data tight and your redundancies minimal," I said. "I'll send you my notes from a NATO op last year." He nodded, his eyes bright with respect, and said, "You're the real deal, Alyssa." It wasn't just professional anymore. He was family now, not just my sister's husband. The house had a new photo wall, tucked by the staircase. Alongside pictures of Camille's wedding and James's college graduation were my milestones, me in Ranger School, muddy and grinning, pinning on my star at the Pentagon, shaking hands with a 4-star general. It was like the family had rewritten our story, making space for me, for my service. We'd started new traditions too. Thanksgiving would be at my base this year, with my troops invited. Camille was already planning to bring the kids, and Dad promised to show up with his famous pecan pie. As we sat there, passing coffee around, I thought about how far we'd come. The truth about Derek Lade, about their mistakes, about my life, had changed us. They'd apologized, owned their part, and I'd chosen to meet them halfway. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They supported my career now, asking about my next posting, planning to come to my promotion ceremonies. Dad even said he'd frame my next medal. I felt content, not just with my stars and my service, but with this, a family that finally saw me. This story proves that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming who you were meant to be and letting your achievements speak louder than any argument ever could. Have you ever experienced a moment where your success and character spoke for themselves, proving your worth to people who once doubted you? Share your victory story below. I love reading about people who rose above others' expectations and stayed true to their values. If this story inspired you to never give up on yourself, even when the people closest to you doubt your dreams, then you belong in this community. Subscribe now if you believe that our worth isn't determined by others' opinions of our choices, but by our own commitment to our values and service to something greater than ourselves. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories of people who proved that character and dedication always triumph over judgment and appearances.